Welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. We have a very interesting podcast today because we're going to be traveling a little bit. We're going to be in Scone Palace, and then we're going to take you to Devon.
Yeah, we're not really.
We're not actually going there, but
we did go to Scone Palace.
We did go to Scone Palace,
but that was for
in your mind. We're going to take you to these places.
The Scottish Game Fair, which we recorded a few weeks back now. A really interesting debate on rewilding with a whole panel of people. So we are not actually in the debate, although we were actually invited onto the panel, but we wanted to be able to record it.
There was some technical difficulties, which we'll go over very shortly. At the time, we'll go over the technical difficulties that were nothing to do with us at all.
But tomorrow is a very special day. We are recording this on the 11th of August, and everybody knows what tomorrow is.
Which is?
The glorious 12th.
Yep. That's what it's referred to.
Opening day of the grouse season, which where we are is
quite a big
celebrated
deal
all around. Yeah, we're surrounded by glens and grouse shooting estates here. And some of you will have seen 1 week ago now, there was about 350 odd gamekeepers and supporters marched through the streets of Edzell to raise awareness for all of the work and interaction that estates have with local communities and the benefits that they have to local communities.
I put up a picture on the podcast page 2 days ago now, and it's been seen, I think, by over 18,000 people.
Wow.
So.
And there is a video out as well.
Yep.
If you want to check out the video for that, go to the Angus Glens Merlin Group Facebook page, and you'll be able to see that video.
Or most of the Merlin Group.
Yeah, I think they all shared it. It's also on our Pace Productions channel as well.
Yeah, it is.
We have a couple of topics that we're going to cover before we introduce you to Colin Arthurs. We talked about the escaped Lynx a few weeks back now.
Yeah, we did actually on our interim podcast, and we've got an insider.
We do. We got the man who was responsible for tracking him, and partly responsible for trapping him.
Yep. And some interesting things coming from it, I think, as well.
Yeah, well,
we can
let's put
discuss
it this
that.
way. It'll be an insight into what went on that you have not heard.
Yep.
So we've got about a 15-minute chat with him, I think.
Try 30-minute chat, but yeah.
Was it a 30-minute chat? Okay, 30-minute chat, and then we go to Scone Palace. Before we do that, a few things in the news. The obvious thing would be to do a lot of conversation about grouse right now.
We are going to cover that in a completely separate podcast because it is too big to talk about in one podcast. There's far too much stuff that we need to cover. And
we want to do it right.
Yeah.
So we're going to hopefully get Andrew Gilruth on from GWCT. Some of you may have heard him debating this morning on the 11th. It was today, wasn't it?
It was, yep.
Yeah. On the BBC, on the radio.
And he's going to be on Country File with Mark Avery as well.
Yeah. So definitely check out that one.
Yeah.
But we're going to get him on.
We are going to get him on, and we'll pose some questions to him. And if you didn't listen to the one on Radio 4, you get to hear Dr. Mark Avery talking.
I have to say that trying to look at it as objectively as possible, and there's very little of what Mark Avery says that I would agree with, if anything. But he definitely lost that argument. If you go and listen to the BBC, in fact, we'll stick the link in the description for this podcast.
Yeah, we can do.
Go and listen to that. He failed miserably to get his point across, and Andrew Gilruth did an excellent job. So we're going to get him on.
Yeah, Mark, we're still waiting for the evidence.
Yeah, we are. You've got a story, Daryl. Coursing.
Which one? Oh, yes, of course. On our home turf. So today, one gentleman, there was actually three of them involved.
Class as a gentleman, would he?
No, he wasn't really. Sorry, I mean, scumbag would be the easiest. But the thing is, we got to. These people are not part of our world at all. He's been sentenced to almost a year in prison, half a year in prison. He'll probably get that reduced, I imagine, with good behaviour, for hare coursing. They're from Aberdeen. There was 3 of them involved. 1 went to prison. The other 2 had a suspended sentence. They're not allowed to keep dogs for a year. And they were caught for 2 reasons. 1, the DNA evidence from their dogs was picked off the hares that were left for dead. Also, when they went to their houses, they confiscated phones and laptops. They had taken pictures of what they'd done. Idiots. And thirdly, people are fairly vigilant, I would say, around this area, and they took the number plate.
It was near Kirriemuir, wasn't it?
Near Kirriemuir. So they travelled from Aberdeen to Kirriemuir to go and do what is blatantly an illegal activity. So, I mean, if you if you're going to do
Break
the
the law,
crime,
expect to be caught.
yeah, exactly. Expect to do the time.
In happier news, the Olympics is on right now. In fact, it has severely curtailed my productivities during the day, because the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning is go and watch what happened at night because of the time difference. And for me, most of that is actually swimming, and we've had some tremendous efforts in the swimming pool, but also in the world of shooting. We have 2 bronze medals so far from Stephen Scott and Tim Neal. So it's brilliant. And the big plus point of that is that it's been picked up by the media. It's in the newspapers. The BBC have picked it up. And it's just, okay, it's not hunting, but it is shooting. And it's bringing it into that realms of acceptability within the public domain. So that's really great what they've achieved as a starting point, but also fantastic that it gives shooting as a sport the opportunity to be in the media in a positive light.
Yeah.
The last thing before we get to Colin Arthurs is Golden Eagles.
Now, we think that the RSPB have probably been sitting on this article for a wee while. It's
a little bit of a coincidence.
It's too convenient that this was brought out the day before the 12th for the grouse shooting. So,
take from that what you will, but I would be pretty confident they've been sitting on it for a while.
Yep. Now, Byron has some stats and figures here, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, these have come from Jamie Stewart at the Scottish Countryside Alliance,
who you're about to hear on the show.
Indeed, you are. He is on the panel along with a couple of other guests and the director of SACS, who is the sponsor of this podcast, of course. But the information that they pulled in response to this article from the RSPB was that of the 8 we all know from the article that there were 8 tagged eagles which are now missing, and that is over a period of five years. The papers which they pulled studying raptors and eagles particularly suggested that there was only actually a 40% survival rate up to the age of 4 years old. So that means a 60% mortality. That's a really large percentage. And on top of that, because of course what we're talking about here is that they can't find the eagles anymore because they can't source the telemetry. There's almost a 50% failure rate on telemetry in the studies that have been done. Both papers that reference these we will put in the description of the podcast, so you can see that we're not making these numbers up. If they're missing 8 eagles, they obviously tagged more. It doesn't take a genius to work out the maths that obviously they're going to lose some either through natural mortality or the fact that the telemetry doesn't work anymore. So I think it's a little bit disingenuous. No, not a little bit. It's very disingenuous of the RSPB to suggest that just because these eagles were tagged in areas where there's managed grouse moors, that this is as a result of persecution. And I was actually just on the phone prior to this podcast to SACS in the office there, and they've been doing a little bit of digging, and they actually found evidence in other research papers. Again, I'll put the website link up for you in the description, is that a lot of these birds actually die of starvation. And the numbers of starvation cases as a reason for death is actually very much underreported.
Well, but so it's not in their benefit to report it.
No.
Because in the article, they straight away jump to persecution. That means that most of the headline articles are due to human interference. That's what the headline articles are. So they're steering you straight away towards an anti-shooting, anti-grouse. I mean, that's what it's about.
Yeah, no, we're not going to suggest that everybody's absolutely squeaky clean. We talked about it 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, we talked about it
where
before.
there was an illegal trap, and that shouldn't happen. But to immediately jump to that conclusion is just not fair, especially when it is the case that the public, the general public, put a lot of weight in what a big organization like the RSPB has to say. So when you see news reports like that and in the newspapers, it puts a completely a spin on it which isn't fair and taints the whole industry. And on what basis? There's absolutely no evidence there. It's complete speculation.
Yeah, and the one small problem I have with it is that they're actually interfering with these birds at a very young age, putting these tags on them. And I think, I've got no evidence to back this up, but I think that surely there is some effect of interfering with young birds at a young age, putting a tracker on them, and then letting them go into the wild. Surely that has some kind of effect of them.
I think we have to ask a few questions, not just with regard to tagging of birds, but wildlife monitoring in general, how much should we really be interfering? And I'd say probably the RSPB are the worst for this in particular, because they monitor pretty much everything. They don't necessarily have great success results on their own reserves, but they're certainly monitoring pretty much anything you can think of, whether that be tagging or just visual monitoring. Should we be doing that all the time, or should it be more of just of a general management and a less interactive management with things like eagles and hen harriers? It's something which I would actually really like to have a further discussion on. It would be good to have someone on from the RSPB at some point. We are continuing to try such things, as well as get the likes of Packham and Avery on, which we have mentioned before, and who we have tried to contact through social media. But I'm sure one day we will be successful.
I'm sure. I think other questions do have to be asked as well, just wrapping up this, is why aren't they working more closely with the grouse moors, with the golden eagles, evidently have their territories? If they actually work more closely with them, reports of sightings and so on, it would help everyone. But as we all know, the RSPB blatantly do not want to work with these people.
And they've just pulled out of the hen harrier project.
Yeah.
So I don't quite know what that says, but...
well, I think it says a lot.
I think it says a lot, but we will cover that again. But there was plenty of press around them pulling out of that at the time.
Now, competition winner. I guess everybody always wants to know who's won what, and there is another prize this week, and you'll have to listen to the end of the podcast to get to that.
It's a good prize.
Yep.
So 2 weeks ago, we gave you the opportunity to win a Spyderco knife. Yep. Which I actually don't have here because it's back at my office. But yes, that's what you had the chance to win, and it was very simple. We told you a story about, Daryl told you the story about a milk that he bought. Can you remember what the name? Arla.
It was Arla milk or something.
Milk, where a certain percentage of that went straight back to farmers. So
I think by the end it had 85,000 people reached. It was ridiculous.
It was crazy. All over a picture of 2.5 litres of milk.
Yeah.
So the competition for 2 weeks ago was you had to send us a picture of you buying some sort of British farming produce.
Product.
Yeah.
British product. Yeah.
We had entrants, but the most impressive of which was not even in this country. It was an avid follower of ours.
He has followed us pretty much since the beginning, actually.
He likes a lot of our pictures. He sends us a lot of comments. But he's actually in Portugal, and he managed to do it, not just once, but
so shame
twice.
on the people that didn't manage in this country, because someone managed in Portugal.
Yes. So that is you, Francisco Sequeira, I think. Apologies if I'm screwing up your surname, but you'll definitely know who you are. Well done. You win the knife, so you know how to find us. Ping us a message. We'll get your address and stuff, and we'll send it out to you.
I love Paul Wilkie, who actually won the bipod, actually shot us a message saying, how am I going to get some British produce? He works out in Saudi Arabia. I'm sorry, Paul, but you did win 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, you won 2 weeks before, so I think it was fair. He couldn't enter again, but he did. At least he took the time to send us a message.
Yeah. Right, we're going to jump straight into the show.
Yes, we are. We're kicking off with Colin Arthurs, talking about the Lynx and his experience. Don't forget that this podcast is supported and brought to you by the Scottish Association for Country Sports. Colin, thank you very much for joining us on the show. We've brought you on because you've been, and the activities that you have been doing have been very much in the press in the last couple of weeks, in conjunction with some work with Scott Country, a zoo, and a well-known lynx that escaped. Just tell me, how on earth did you end up getting roped into this?
Good evening, Byron. I had a call from Paul at Scott Country. The Scott Country are renowned for their night vision kit, asking if I would assist Dartmoor Zoo with the potential tracking and location of Flavio, a lynx that had escaped after the first night in its new den.
So they hadn't. They obviously hadn't. Actually, how did I don't even know how
I
it
don't
actually
know how it
escaped.
I believe it dug its way out. Flavio is a 2-year-old Carpathian lynx. I had to do my research on a particular non-native species that I was going to start tracking in the fields, and he came from Kent. He was delivered early in the evening. I'm not sure what the date was, but later on in the evening, he was no longer there. He'd broken out by digging out of his pen, I think, was what was happening.
So they had very short ownership over him.
Well, it was an unfortunate circumstance, I think, really, to be honest with you.
They must have.
Then lynxes will bury the food, hide their food, what they capture, what they don't eat. But obviously, he wasn't happy and wanted to widen his ground.
Yeah, there must have been a few worried faces in the morning.
Well, there was a large search team that went out, including Devon and Cornwall Police helicopter with their thermal imaging kit. They had a local lady called Sam Farlap who does dog tracking with bloodhounds, and they were out and they did pick up a few tracks and scents, but they sort of lost them really. But there was a large turnout to assist in the tracking and recapture, but sadly to no avail.
So how long did all of that activity go on before you got involved with Scott Country?
I'd say it probably went on for a good 14 to 20 days. I'd spent really 4 days assisting with the tracking before he was actually recaptured. And
talk me through that process a little bit. So all from the kit that you got from Scott Country to actually traveling down, planning it, managing it, and then the whole process through the days that you were there until everyone knows now, you finally captured it.
Indeed. Well, I was reluctant initially to take this on, simply because I've never really tracked a lynx or a non-native species in the UK. And at the same time, I was very conscious that there was commercially a lot of face to be lost for Scott Country and Dartmoor Zoo. And there was also a lot of pressure from the press to come along and joining with us and tracking. So a couple of things we had to be fairly conscious of was, firstly, the kit that we're using, which is the Pulsar X50, XQ50 and the HD50. And also the cost involved with those. But also, I'm from a hunting and fishing and field sports background, so we had to be conscious of hunt saboteurs and animal rights and everybody else, because people have been out with their dogs trying to track it down, and hunt saboteurs were saying, just leave it alone, let it be out there, it wants to be free, oh my God, they're going to shoot it. And it was all a lot of negative press around it, and some of the tabloids actually found it quite funny, the whole fiasco of it, really. But there was a serious point to this, and that was there was a non-native species that had escaped locally. It was non-wild. It always had been hand-fed. It's very used to human contact. And it's an environment that it was totally alien to him outside of the zoo. So cars, cows, everything else like that was all alien to it. So I had to do some research, really, to look at what I was going to be tracking. I had no idea, essentially, what its feed habitats were, what its living habitat was. So I sat down and looked at a good OS map and studied what its ground would be, which is really heavy undergrowth, trees, rocky outcrops. And I sort of had an idea in my head where I think he would have gone. The zoo then sent me some images of where they had sightings, some verified and some not verified. And that coincided where I had an idea he would be. And then I sort of went down before we had a press review on a Sunday, and I went down on a Thursday and a Friday and a Saturday and did some recces along with that. So yeah, it was quite interesting, quite exciting. But when I got there, the terrain was just exactly what he wanted to be in, really, to be fair.
In terms of actually capturing him in the end, what was your plan once you arrived and you realized, okay, obviously you can understand why he wants to be there and roughly where he's going to be? How did you go about actually catching him, and how did you use the kit to help you do that?
So what was really interesting with using the thermal kit was the local population of wildlife. And I say wildlife, that particular area where Dartmoor Zoo is actually overflowing with fallow deer. There's an abundance of rabbits. There's a couple of local shoots down there. There's a lot of sheep around, and there's lots of corvids. So what became quite apparent very early on, in fact the first night, was that west of the zoo there was an absolute abundance. You could see deer and foxes. You know, I was calling foxes in within sort of 20 feet of me. I would have deer within sort of 30 feet of me. There was corvids. There was an absolute abundance of rabbits. And then you go to the east side of the zoo, and it was like somebody just rubbed them all out. There was nothing there at all. Even during the day, you would not get a huge number of corvids, which was unusual, really, considering that there were a lot of sheep around. So, and that was the area where they've had a lot of sightings, some tracks, some physical sightings, and then the following day I went down, and over the night somebody had stopped their car and taken a picture of him going through a hedge on the west side of the zoo, no longer on the east side. So we had a feeling then that what he was actually trying to do was he was just beginning to get comfortable where he was. You know, he was reasonably sure of his surroundings and felt safe there, and he was just moving himself out across the terrain and just looking at the perimeter, really, and just exploring. At that time, we didn't really think he would be attempting to rewild himself. He'd attempted on a couple of occasions to get meat from the traps from the outside. He hadn't actually gone inside of the traps. And at that time, there was no loss of livestock. We found a few corvids that had been caught and eaten, but that was really all we had to go on. And then on my second night, I parked the car up. I had my son with me, and that particular part of the country on Dartmoor is just on the edge of Dartmoor, is actually pitch black. Anybody who lives in Scotland will know what I mean, or the Brecon Beacons. It's very dark. And we parked the car up. We got out, put the thermal imager on. At that time, I was using the HD50S with the pulsar recording device on it. I set that up. I hadn't started recording because I really pretty much anticipated what I would do is see him in the distance and start recording. And we go up this little old cart track, which really you can just about get a tractor up. And Thomas had the torch on the floor pointing down so we could just gauge where we were going. And I put the thermal imager up to my eye and turned the corner, and I walked straight into him. He was bolt upright. You could tell straight away that it was not a domestic cat simply by the size of his ears. And he stood there and he looked at us, and I then flapped around trying to turn on the recording and to tell Thomas to turn the torch off. And I looked back up again and he'd wandered off. So we walked around in the corner and he was just sauntering away, walking up the lane, casual as Jack, really. So I recorded him going up the lane, and then he went around a corner out of sight again. So we ran up the lane a bit, and then he looked back at us and he stopped, had another look at us sideways on, and just turned around and walked up the lane and jumped up the hedge and was gone. So
so close, but so far,
and not very bothered with you, which is quite surprising.
No, and I think that's the thing. You know, you kind of, when you go out stalking, you're very conscious of your wind direction. You're very conscious of the noise that you're making. You're conscious that, you know, as soon as anything is being predated by us, sees us, it's gone. Even a domestic cat, you see a domestic cat, out at night, it crouches to the floor and it scats away with its tail out. This thing just walked up the lane as though it's just going for a casual Sunday afternoon stroll. And that particular footage we had, we didn't want to release because we knew that further up the lane there was a horse stables and they had 2 domestic cats that lived in the stables. To the untrained eye of thermal imaging or any night vision kit, you could almost say, well, that looks like a domestic cat. But actually, when you sit down and you look closely at the dark areas of the bleed from the thermal image, essentially his back end had no tail coming down and sweeping out, the tip of the tail sweeping out and turning up. And there was nothing like that at all. All you had was a heat signature down the back. It stopped, and then you had thermal bleed, then it bled off into darkness. And there was this penny-shaped cut on its back end through the thermal imager that you could think, actually, that really is it. But when he walked up the lane, lynxes have a strange posture. Their rear end is higher than the front end. And that was very distinct. But what we didn't want to do because of the negativity with the press and everything else was release an image that could be ripped apart. It's not like a picture. It's a white blob with a lot of bleed around the edges, and you kind of have to work it out what it is. But yeah, we walked straight into it.
And from there, you obviously had a better idea where it was, and then did you rearrange where your traps were, or what was the lead up to finally catching that one night?
What Dartmoor Zoo did, a chap called Andrew Goodman, who is absolutely brilliant, really, to be honest with you. He put out a load more wildlife cameras up that particular lane, and we know he's been going up that lane because we've seen tracks there. People have sighted him there. So we intensified our search area around that particular lane. But there was a couple of sightings and a couple of track prints further west again to the area where this particular picture was taken of him on the side of a road. So we kind of just kept doing a perimeter and just working it in with the thermal imager. And with the thermal imager, you do not have to be close to it at all. You could be a mile away, you could be 1.5 miles away, and you can pick up a heat signature. And a heat signature of fox, you can tell between that signature and a sheep and a horse and a rabbit and a deer. You kind of your eye starts to retrain on what it's looking at. And when we had spotted signatures that we were not quite sure what they were, we focused on that particular area. So another 3 o'clock in the morning, we returned home after a sort of 140-mile round trip. We had the press come down. I think it was on a Sunday, and the press included the Daily Mail and some freelance journalists, along with the local BBC Spotlight. We had interviews and we had some stage ups done, but the real work was actually, let's get out and let's really try and track out where he is now. And what came out of that particular night was that the east side of the zoo, the wildlife suddenly returned, and we'd lost him altogether then. We went to the west side, nothing. So we kind of took 2 steps forward and took this one big step back where actually, we'd lost all sense of where he was. And then we'd left it for a week because I had work commitments. I couldn't go down there. And I then sought some additional help from a local keeper who I've known for many years, and he is, really good with his field skills and just has a judge for things. So we turned up at the zoo, and we were directed to the slaughterhouse to find Andrew Goatman skinning 4 sheep that had been attacked that morning or over the night. And we weren't sure whether it was dogs, because it's a renowned area for people going out lurching deer with their dogs, or whether something else had killed it. So once they'd skinned them and we turned the skin inside out, you could actually see a definite claw marks down the hind quarter of the sheep. Its esophagus had been torn out and eaten, where it obviously killed it, and the rear end had been eaten out. Typically, what normally happens, which what a fox would do. So we knew that the sheep had been taken down. We weren't entirely sure whether he'd fed off them or not, and that really was a game changer then, because that changed the whole atmosphere and mechanics of the whole stalking and retrapping and actually getting him, because now he was beginning to play and rewild himself. There was a greater risk to livestock locally, and the fear from the zoo and ourselves is that, you know, if he's not going to get caught soon, he's going to end up getting shot.
Yeah.
And that was a huge concern. But the press have a lot to say about things like that as well. So,
so at that point, obviously you had to raise your game, because at the point where the sheep were killed, it wasn't actually that long after that you ended up catching the lynx, was it?
It was within 8 hours.
Okay.
yeah, it was kind of surreal. When we turned up and we looked at the sheep, we got there to the zoo around about 8 o'clock, and I looked at my keeper friend, and we both looked at each other and thought, bugger, this is really changing the whole thing altogether. And there was a lot of pressure then. So Andrew Goatman earlier in that day had set some new traps, and these traps they couldn't use a normal fox trap or anything like that, because essentially he'd get halfway in and the trap would release and he'd be able to pull himself out. These traps were 2 foot across by 5 foot long, and the release plate was a size of a 15-inch open laptop, if you know what I mean. If you fold the screen right back on the laptop, it's the size of that. So he'd placed those strategically around the area where the sheep had been culled or killed. He removed the sheep, baited the traps, and told us where they were. At the same time, he was putting some other traps around the area. So by the time we left the zoo, around about 9:15, 9:30, we went to the area, to the perimeter of where he killed these sheep, and just started working around the area with the thermal imaging. You know, all the wildlife was there. There's nothing to indicate that he was around there at all. But so we pretty much tracked all the lanes, all the old lanes in the car. I mean, some of it is really dense woodland, heavy undergrowth. And because of the particular area, it's a mining area. And a few years ago, the mine was reopened, and a lot of the houses local to that area had a clause in their deeds that should the mine reopen, then they would be repossessed or bought at a market rate or slightly above market rate, and the owners would be evicted. So there's a lot of houses there where essentially, you know, he could quite easily just lie up for the day, because they sleep during the day, and just mooch around, you know. And so we mooched around with him, and we had one particular lane that we wanted to go up and just double check. So, and this is a lane that was west of where the sheep were killed, and it's the only track you can theoretically go up, because the other thing we had to be conscious of was landowners were very twitchy about people going across their land at night through, obviously, illegal poaching and everything else. So we wanted to be sure that we were where we could be legally without fear of any recumbents or anything, or being shot at or anything like that. So we went up this particular bridle path, reached the top of the bridle path, scouted around, nothing, but it was dead of any wildlife. So we thought, yeah, this could be worthwhile. So we reached the top of this particular path and walked out onto the hill, and the wind was behind us going down towards where the trap was. So we knew the trap was on the hedge line somewhere, but we didn't know exactly where it was. So we get to the top of the hill by the bracken, and we stood there for a while just watching a firework display, ironically, in Plymouth, and just occasionally scanning. And it was that occasional scan that we picked him out, and he was just trotting from our right to our left, down the hill, heading towards, at the time we didn't know what it was, but where the sheep had been killed. Relaxed as anything, not like cautious or anything. He knew exactly where he was going. That was his interest. And he dropped down then out of sight on this hill. So we moved down further and picked him up again. And at the bottom of this hill, along the hedge line, was an old cart track. And it's a deep, if you know Devon well, you'll get these old deep cart tracks that just come out of nowhere. And he dropped out over one of those. And we knew there were deer around, and we'd seen deer not too far away from us. And at that point, we heard twang of what we thought was fence wire. And we thought, that's a deer. So as he spooked the deer, is he chasing the deer, or we spooked the deer with the windage? So we waited, and then we heard this bang, 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 bang. And we thought, you know what, that could be him. And we were just about to start moving briskly, rather excitedly, towards where the sound was, and we thought, do you know what, is he trying to get the meat from the outside of the trap again? We had no idea whether he's in or out of the trap. So we just moved up the hill a little bit more to get the windage away, and moved around, and then we heard it was almighty, just crashing, and we thought, you know what, whatever it is in the trap. And we walked down towards the noise, flipped the lamp on, and guess what, he was in the trap.
Job done.
Absolutely job done. I was buzzing there. So I tried to phone the operation manager for the zoo. Couldn't get a hold of him. I got hold of Andrew Goatman, who said, "You're joking," something like that. And I said, "No, he's in the trap." He said, "Right, we'll get a team up." So he was busy organising a team. I then texted Ben Mee, the owner of the zoo. I said, "We've got him," and he replied back saying, "What, you've seen him?" I phoned him back then, and I said, "No, Ben, he's in the trap." And several expletives later, "You're joking?" Yes, no, he's in the trap. He's in the trap.
And that was it. He was
for him then. So as soon as we'd finished talking and turned the lamp off, he was quite chilled. So sort of 15 minutes later, we turned the lamp on again and just checked him out, and he was all okay. Because if something's in a cage, the claw sizes that he's got on his pads, he could quite easily rip his claws out by just trying to get out. And we were just like, oh, for God's sake, just get here as quick as you can before, he either damages himself or he does actually get out of this trap.
Yeah.
And out of the whole events over the 4 or 5 days I was helping him out down there, the one thing that struck me was the size of him.
They're big.
He is.
Just describe the whole animal, because we did a very long podcast on the possible reintroduction of Lynx. But just you've seen him firsthand. Just describe the Lynx for us.
I could describe it as he's the size of a Labrador, a nice sized Labrador. He is as lean as a good HBR,
Mm-hmm.
and he has the build of a cheetah. He has a high back end, a low front end. His head is the size of, not far off the size of a cheetah, I would say. And his ears are just designed to just pick up the slightest scent. And if you when you start to research how the lynx can capture things, their pads are designed to carry their weight and spread their weight so they don't sink in the snow. Their ears are designed to listen through the snow, pick up the slightest noise, and they have a large nose to pick up scent, and they have the physique not to run huge distances, but to be able to spread itself and get down low, but also have that acceleration and the power they needed. These sheep weren't, well, they were lambs, but they were, not far off sheep size, a good sized lamb, and he brought 4 down in the same night without any issue, without any problem at all.
Was there any other evidence of, was he eating anything else? Did you guys find any deer or anything?
All we found was a few magpies that had been eaten. I was keen to find scats. I was really keen to find scats because then we could identify what he was eating. But we never found any scats, to be fair. And there was nothing else really to say that he was eating, apart from the occasional attempt to try and get the meat from out the traps without going into the traps, and the dead corvids, and essentially the sheep. But he could quite easily have picked up rabbits easily. But he's always been fed by hand, so there is no natural instinct in him to go and kill something straight away. He might want to play with things, and apparently when he was in Kent, in his zoo in Kent, he'd trapped a pigeon and played with the pigeon. So, they have that instinct there, but, they have these huge ground designed for looking at night. And, he obviously had fantastic eyesight because he evaded us for so long. 24 days, I think it was, he evaded the zoo's capture.
So he was getting hungry by the end, so those natural instincts start to come through.
He hadn't lost any weight. He when he arrived at the zoo, he was 20 kilos. And when he was recaptured and weighed again, he was still about 19.5, 19.8 kilos. So he hadn't lost any weight, and his condition looked really good. His coat looked really good. So
he's probably eating something then.
Oh, absolutely. So whether he was, obviously they put out a few carcasses, bits of carcasses strategically placed in certain areas outside of public access, and yet none of those have been touched. And one of the things that when I was doing my research, I found was that actually, do you know what? They don't like tainted meat. So in Canada, where they hunt bobcats, the advice given by the game controllers out there is that if you're hunting bobcats and you do not want to trap or shoot a lynx, because they look very similar, a lynx and a bobcat, but if you don't want to trap a lynx, use tainted meat.
Interesting.
So,
I didn't realise that there would be such a difference between the bobcat and the lynx.
Oh yeah,
yeah, you're right. They do from a distance look like fairly similar animals.
They do, but when you get up close, you can see.
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
Genetically they look entirely different.
What I found interesting in what you're saying is that in the areas that you know him to be, everything else moved out.
Oh yeah, that was just the weirdest thing, really. No rabbits. We saw probably 3 or 4 rabbits over the 4-night period that we were out, 5-night period, in the area that he was first seen, and it was just odd, and that gave us a lot of confidence. There's something in there that nothing really likes, nothing seen before, and then you have all these stories of big cats, and I'm sure some may be true, some may be not, but instinctively, there's something that wildlife doesn't like, it will not go back there. It's fight or flight, isn't it?
Yeah, they have that inbuilt instinct towards predators, no matter what they are, I think.
Yeah.
But just
which puts a bigger target for the sheep on their backs. They're the only ones that can't get out.
Well,
That's
they're
true, yeah.
kitten ducks, really. We call them field fleas down here. There's so many of them. But for him to be able to actually change his whole game, he was obviously getting hungry. He obviously was looking at his particular area and his territory, and he was looking to, I don't know, probably extend that. And the big concern we had was, if he extends to the moor, which isn't that far, would he survive? He may do, he may not. He doesn't have the same level of cover that he would like his open moorland there. He'd struggle to survive. But then again, if he went into the woodlands, you'd probably end up losing him altogether. And being able to trap him at that point would be really difficult, because very close to where he was caught, across the road, is a solar farm, and below the solar farm is 200-300 acres of woodland. You struggle to find him then.
But just to kind of finish up on this, on a maybe slightly more amusing note, the media coverage of this was quite extensive all throughout the whole period, and on yourself as well at the end. What was the kind of spectrum of media coverage that you read afterwards?
The Independent, which actually led some really good journalism and some really fair reporting, to people like the Sun and the Mirror, who put me down as Arnold Schwarzenegger, covered in mud, tracking the Lynx. And we had an independent journalist, a chap called Simon Trump, and he was really level-headed. He just took things as it was, and he reported honestly. And it arrived at the desk of the editors and was mashed around. And then in the end, the editors actually said, you know what, we're going to send our own reporters. Daily Mail said that I'd hunted humans or tracked humans. So it all kind of gets blown out of proportion. The hunt saboteurs in the southwest, said awful things really at the end of the day, where in fact actually what they failed to pick on. And Ben Mee, who doesn't advocate hunting at all, is more to do with animal conservation. And I sat down and said, look, I said to him, I'm known by hunt saboteurs and animal rights because of what I do, in field sports. I said, but, we could either hide this and bury it, or we can actually turn around and say, well, do you know what? There's two types of conservation, and sometimes those two types of conservation can come together to pull out a positive. And what we have here is Flavio, who escaped for 24 days, and evaded every opportunity to recapture, was finally recaptured by, the likes of technologies that were supplied by Scott Country, my field experience and stalking experience, and their understanding of the animal better than me in how it's going to behave. And we all worked together to give a positive outcome. And at the end of the day, Flavio's now really, excuse the French, pissed off that he's been recaught and recaptured, but he's back where he should be, and being managed and monitored where he should be. And that was the positive outcome of the whole thing, really, regardless of what negative press there might have been, was that the end game was successfully brought to bear.
Yeah, no, it was great. I was really pleased. Paul at Scott Country actually sent me a message the night that the trap went off, so I had a heads up on the media release the day after. So we knew that it was coming, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk us through that. It was great, and I'm sure our listeners will enjoy the story and the real story as well.
And we can even in its experience that my son, who's 15, he's been stalking with me since the age of 5, and carried his first roe deer on his back at the age of 6 for me. And Granite, his first deer at 6, was there with me all the time, and he's really had a part of history in his lifetime. Hopefully we won't get any more escapees. But, the fact that we could all work together, whatever our backgrounds, whatever our beliefs.
That's the key, isn't it?
Yeah. Came good in the end. It was really quite exciting.
And once we edit this and shove in a bit of soundtrack from Predator, then it'll sound a little bit better.
Yeah, just that clicking noise from...
Brilliant. Look, Colin, thank you very much for your time. And I'm sure that we will actually end up speaking again at some point, because I have a feeling there will be future podcasts where we might have to get you on.
Yeah, no, do. The whole experience was fantastic. And I think, if I hadn't had the opportunities that, Bass had given me to hunt in Scotland and stalk in Scotland, and the people that have helped me along the way in all the time, the short time really that I've been actively stalking, and guys like yourself and Scott Country, keen to help out. It's quite humbling, to be fair.
That's great. Well, you have a good rest of your day,
Yeah.
and we'll speak again soon.
Yeah, I'm off to the local show now.
Oh, which one's that?
Oakhampton show.
Brilliant. Well, have a great show. And
It's a bit wet here for a show.
a little
but-
bit, yeah.
Oh, look, you see, sunny southwest, you've got the brunt of it up there. But I'm with you, because I remember sitting on Arran when they had all the bad weather at Cockermouth, and sat at the top of the hill on Arran, waiting for a deer to come out on the glade, and I thought, this is never going to happen.
But you wouldn't change it for the world.
No,
That's the bottom line. No.
Definitely.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Colin.
And you. Thanks, guys. Bye. Bye.
Well, I hope you enjoyed learning all about the recapturing of the lynx down in Devon. There was a few things in there that I found particularly interesting. One was the fact that wherever the lynx was, wildlife moved out, which I found very interesting, but not surprising.
No, you kind of you see a similar sort of thing with foxes, I suppose.
But not surprising, but
the
they
fact
they were using it, and it was obviously very evident that it was happening. And secondly, over the space of its 20-odd day period of being out, it managed to kill 4 sheep, which in our big, lengthy 2.5-hour-long podcast with Dr. Paul O'Donoghue from the Lynx Trust said that they would not be taking many sheep at all. Obviously, this was an escapee from a zoo, so not a truly wild lynx. So you have to take that into account. But
yeah, the point is they do take. I was just going to say that actually, just to be as objective as possible about it. This was for hand-fed lynx, so it was very clear from the story that Colin was telling that it was slowly getting to grips with what being a wild lynx is all about. So that might have been part of it, easy prey, but yeah.
I feel sorry for it.
The
zoo, I feel so sorry for it.
I was actually thinking about this when we were getting to the end of that story, because I'm not a massive fan of zoos. I have to say, I don't even go into a zoo anymore because I find it too depressing to look at the animals that are in there. And yeah, it is kind of sad in a way. That he had all this massive area, and he must have thought he was the man. Yeah,
tasted freedom. Right,
but anyway, is what it is.
We're going to go on to our next bit, and I'm just going to cover our technical difficulties very quickly, and then Byron's going to tell us what actually went on. Now, we were there recording, and everything was fine. Someone forgot to put fuel in the generator, which powered not only our microphones, but the microphones for the whole event. It went down. There was nothing we could do about it, so there was a quite a big chunk in the middle missing, but we're going to try and fill it in for you.
Yes, we are. Now, don't worry, we don't just let you listen to blank space for 30 minutes, which is about the period of time where it went down. What you are missing out is basically the end of the presentation by David Balharry, which was very interesting, and it was a discussion and presentation on rewilding and what that actually means. If you want to understand a little bit more and maybe try and fill in some of the blanks, because it does follow on quite well, we kind of cut from his unfinished presentation into some debate with a panel who you will be introduced to at the start. But go and check out Rewilding Britain website. There's loads of information on there. That's who he's seconding to right now from the government. And there's everything that he is talking about and presenting is pretty much in the website to a greater or lesser extent. So you can maybe have a browse of that and it'll fill in some blanks. But we're going to kick straight off. The actual debate was sponsored by Sheen and Tate. You will be introduced to Rory Kennedy, who is a partner of Sheen and Tate, and he is taking the actual debate. So you're not really going to hear from us very much, although what we're going to do is we will interject throughout this just with a few small comments and maybe sort of introduce you to the people actually talking, because although if you were there you'd be able to see who was talking and their name, it won't be that obvious while you're listening here. So we'll help you along, but it's a really interesting discussion, and you hear from a variety of people across a variety of organizations, and it's very rare that you have that spectrum in the same room debating the same topic.
Well, we hope you enjoy, and we'll try and keep the flow going for you.
On behalf of Sheen and Tate, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for braving the Game Fair traffic. There's one or two people that are still to arrive, so I'm sure they can just file past. I want to introduce myself as well. I'm Rory Kennedy. I'm head of rural at Sheen and Tate, an independent accountancy practice. I'm sure most of you know us. 130 years old in the next couple of years. The subject today is quite a contentious one, as you all know, and this discussion today has really come out of actually an evening with Stuart Brooks, and the idea that rewilding has become a bit of a football for land reform. The two have been seen as mutually exclusive, which is not necessarily the case, and indeed animal rights themes being tied in with it. And on the other side as well, there is a lot of histrionics and hysteria about and hyperbole about the threat of things like Lynx. So just the last couple of weeks we had NFU suggesting that it was a threat, they were potentially a threat to ramblers, and close to home we've had claims of sea eagles eating children. So what we're talking about today is really a bit more of a sort of a bit more of a cooperative approach. We're going to look at the concept of rewilding, and then we've got a panel here who, quite an experienced panel across existing land use and other areas of rewilding and agriculture, and they will challenge David on what he says, no doubt. Now, for brevity, I'm not going to give everyone a full introduction on the panel because we have got quite a large panel, but first of all I'd like to thank David Balharry. David is head of Rewilding Scotland and has a very varied background, including the likes of the Crofting Commission, the Deer Commission, and he is very much a participant in field sports himself. He is a stalker, so I think we're going to get quite a balanced perspective from him. On the panel we have Alex Stoddart, who is the director of the Scottish Association for Country Sports, Scotland's largest field sports organisation, who's himself originally from a professional stalking background, but I think particular focus on amenity of shooting for everyone. Jamie Stewart, who's director of Scottish Countryside Alliance, again originally a stalker, then went and studied environmental sciences at university, came back, ended up working for SNH. They worked a legal project and for RSPB on their goose project, their grey-leg goose. Stuart Brooks is the CEO of John Muir Trust, and that's an organisation that actually does what it promises on rewilding and actually runs large areas of Scotland for that purpose. And finally, on the panel, Andrew Gilruth, who is Director of Communications for Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust. We do have George Milne as well from the National Sheep Association, but he's running a bit late, so he will file on in behind. So just to go over some of the housekeeping for today, David will speak. We'll aim to wrap up by about 11:15. If anyone needs to sneak out earlier, there is an exit there to the side. We are also recording this for Into the Wilderness podcast, which is, I would urge you all to check it out on YouTube, their TV channel, and also on iTunes. So be aware, don't say anything you don't want recorded, but hopefully this will be an informal, good discussion today. So without further ado, I would like to hand you over to David Balharry.
Thank you, Rory. This is the first time I've ever spoken where somebody says you're being recorded, so don't say anything that you don't want to. I just almost feel like sitting down and going back up to Cannock. The there's quite a few things that I need to go through, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. At the end, there's been some sort of questions or topics. There's a structure given. And with respect to Rory, just sort of looking at them, it's all it's quite combative. So it's Grousemoor versus ecotourism. It's about morality. It's about opportunity or threat. It's about saint or sinner. So the presentation, and you can frame this discussion, if you like, in a way that's black and white, you're for or against. I guess a key thing that I'm going to try and do is to try and get across to you that that's not the way I see the discussion on rewilding at all. There's a couple of things that are very topical in the press today, but just useful for me to flag up. So one, I guess, well, we'll start with this one. So the Sands of Pollen, you won't see that picture, but effectively that's a trophy picture. It's a trophy of me and my two boys after a day in the hill before we start dragging. And I just need you to understand that where I come from, I get the whole trophy thing. But today is also the anniversary of Cecil the lion. So that blew up in the media because somebody took a photograph of themselves standing beside a lion. There's a backstory and so on, but it's the detail of the Cecil story is different to the way society reacted. The other thing that's in the news today, listening to it all the way coming down the road, is it's the anniversary of the Somme. And the point that the commentators are making is that there was huge losses on both sides. There was huge losses because they were forced into a situation of a polarised debate. The rights and wrongs in that history now looks at and decides. But the point is that I think in this room we actually share far more in common. And that's what I'm going to try and take you to through this talk. The final thing in terms of the news today was the stuff about the ozone layer. And later on, I'm going to make the point that one of the things that characterises the generation that I've come up through is that we are the first generation in the history of mankind that knows that we've got the ability to destroy the planet. So in 300 years, 400 years from now, news reports are going to be going, this is the centenary of something happening. And it's like, what did they do to address some of those changes that they knew were happening? And the ozone is a really good example. So in a sense, big ozone layer, global warming, something was done, and there's a positive response happening. So that's just one example. Before we go into detail, I'd just like to say a little bit about myself. So for those that don't know me, I am Dick's son. I was asked that this morning. I am on secondment from the Scottish Government for 12 months. So I left in November. I'm due to go back in November, depending on how this secondment works out. The other thing that's really important to be aware is that the rewilding debate is landowner-led. So the funding that has come into rewilding that pays for me is being paid for effectively by people who have landowning interests. And I think with that, I'll start. So in November, I took on this job working for this charity, and I don't know how clearly that's coming across, but it's Paddington Bear waving a Union Jack under the heading of Rewilding Britain with a wolf print. And if I went out into some of the Highland communities and said, guys, this is what I represent, I would, without explanation, be lucky to get away with my life, I think. Now, there are a few reasons for that. First of all, there's a big misconception about the word re in the way that rewilding uses it. So re implies, everybody says, we don't want to go backwards. And I couldn't agree more. It is about going forward. So the re part misrepresents what we're about. Then you've got the wild part that in some way, partly because of the wildland debate or the way it's been picked up, seems to imply that it's without people. And again, nothing could be further from the truth. So it's about going forward, and it's about people. Then you've got the Britain thing. And I think the reality is that the political landscape at the moment in Scotland is that Britain doesn't sell that well. So working for a charity that has quite an ambitious aim, it's quite a long-term objective, under the banner of Rewilding Britain it's a big ask. So what I appreciate is the next bit's quite challenging, so I'm just going to tell you what we're about. Chair of Rewilding Britain is this guy, Sir Charlie Burrell, who owns a big estate down south. And Charlie's background is really interesting, and I'm going to say more about it. But working with Charlie, no, I'll tell you about his estate first and his life journey. He owned he inherited a family farm, and it has over 100 years of industrial farming going on. When Charlie took it on, he had 20 years of running it to maximise farming profit, and he was getting more and more into debt. And then he went on a trip to Holland, and he met this guy called Van Svera, which is the big rewilding project in Holland, which I don't know if many of you have heard of it. I won't dwell on it too long. But it's in this area, and I can't speak Dutch, but it's sort of pronounced Oost van der Plassen. So it's an area of the polders that's been reclaimed, and it's totally managed now for natural processes in the absence of any predators. So you've got reintroduction of semi-native horses or whatever, or deer, and they are being allowed to starve. And it's caused a massive public outcry in Holland, but it's still going on, and it is seen as being, it's quite an interesting experiment in a sense, because it's no different to ecosystems elsewhere in the world where large ungulates, their populations rise, and then they get overpopulated and there is starvation. The question is, has society moved on too much to allow that to happen? So anyway, working with Charlie and the other trustees, this is just to summarise Charlie's estate down south. We came up with this idea. And the idea was that really what Scotland needs is some keystone species, some large carnivores brought back in to help us control the deer population. So wolves and lynx are some. But really exciting is bears. So what we're doing, we're sort of thinking about putting together a catalogue of the different types of bears that you could get in Scotland. And that's really exciting because here you could have these black lads with the white rings around their necks, or you could have, I don't know if you can see these, but these are brown bears. They're quite cute as well. Or we could have global climatic change. You could have even polar bears. And if you're wanting a bit more diversity, we could even have black and white bears. And we'd have them in Scotland, and that will really help with ecotourism, help control some help control populations of ungulates, and so on. So we're putting together this catalogue, and we're going around some of the really wealthy landowners and saying, guys, we can help you achieve this objective. You just need to give us a heads up. What do you want? You want a big dog, or do you want a bear? And if you want a bear, what colour of bear do you want? And I guess what I'm saying is that is the common perception of the way that the rewilding debate has gone to date. And I guess you're looking at me and you're saying, this is what you're thinking, is Dave, look, we're really trying to see this from your perspective. But if you are thinking that that's going to work in Scotland, you know, you're not on the same planet that we're on. I get that, guys. Rewilding is not about the introduction of large carnivores into Scotland. That's not its primary purpose. That's part of a debate that will happen through generations, long after we're gone. But it's not what rewilding in Scotland's about. And the reason it's not about that is that, I don't know how many you can see that, but there's a really nice picture there of an adult brown bear. And if you're going to introduce animals like that into Scotland, you're talking about really serious change, not in terms of just the ecosystem, but in terms of about how society lives and how we manage the land and so on. These are massive changes, way bigger than anything to do with Brexit. I mean, honestly, that's a huge discussion. And whether it ever happens or not, to be honest, my life's too short to be engaged in that debate. But I'm not saying it won't happen in the future or that debate isn't for some other people to take forward. Okay, so what's it really about? Well, for me, I'll just put these all up at once. I think these are the 5 things that are absolutely key. It's about change, and land use is about change. I'll say more about that. It's about respect. So for everybody in this room, Alex, you and I had a conversation about altercations that we've had in the past in different roles. At no time in those positions was there an absence of respect. And I hold that for every land use in Scotland today. Everybody who's involved is that, don't get me wrong, I might suggest that there's an area, a discussion to have that's different to what we're used to. That doesn't imply a lack of respect. The next thing is that's really key in this whole thing is dignity. So I know lots of people who are 2nd, 3rd generation involved in a type of land use. And what's really important is that any change that takes place respects the dignity of those people and how they move forward. or what their children do in the future. And if you get that wrong, then to be honest, in terms of, there's a question that we're going to debate later, the morality of disrespecting people or people at their later stages in life losing their dignity is appalling. So we're not about that. The next thing is it's about time. So land use change takes place over time. And you in this room and other people have an opportunity to influence the direction that that land use change goes in. As you'll hear more about, rewilding is about presenting a scenario and saying, you might want to have a look at this option because it might actually deliver all your benefits. And if I can, just stop for a second. What I'd like you to do just now as I'm speaking is to be thinking about the reasons why people own land. And I've got some ideas myself, I'm going to put them up on a slide later. But my belief is that in certain parts of Scotland, for any reason that you can give me as to why people own land, rewilding offers a viable alternative that might measure or compare very favourably with whatever criteria you've got. So I'm going to get to that at the end, but you can start thinking about it just now.
And there the fuel ran out in the generator, as we said earlier, which is really unfortunate. Because
nobody seemed to know what was actually going on.
It took quite a while to work out. I was running around in the background, and there was two guys and engineers peering over the generator, thinking something had broken. Meanwhile, all they had to do was put some diesel in it, which is annoying because we were really getting into the swing of things there. I think it's not going to matter too much. Jamie Stewart from the Scottish Countryside Alliance picks up here, and we really get into the thrust of debate. And there's a lot of to and fro where they raise questions from his presentation, and then David Balharry has the opportunity to sort of counter those. So I don't think it's going to matter too much. The one thing I would say that is probably missing is that during his conversation on rewilding, he does bring up part of a debate with regard to trophy hunting, and he connects that to Africa. And although I have to say that of all the rewilding type discussions and debates, I would say that the one with David Balharry was probably the most level-headed debate that I've probably heard. His conversation with regard to trophy hunting and its place in Africa was quite far off the mark, and also how photographic tourism and other forms of tourism could compensate by removing trophy hunting. The one other aspect, and you will hear this later, is there seems to be, and I'm not quite sure why he feels this, that the view of celebrities is important. I honestly couldn't care less what a celebrity thinks, because who are they to make any kind of judgment when they don't have knowledge in a particular area? If they are just a celebrity for whatever it is, whether it be sport or famous for the sake of being famous, which we often have to put up with, or comedians like Ricky Gervais making statements on things they actually know nothing about. And for some reason, that forms part of the debate from David Balharry as to why we should be changing what we do. And I quite honestly couldn't care less what these people think. I think that we should be changing what their perception is if we honestly believe it's correct. So
he also brings up an interesting thing about the Lynx Trust and this distinction between Rewilding Britain and the Lynx Trust. They are not the same entity at all.
In fact, they actually have nothing to do with one another, which, I'm glad you brought that up, Daryl, because it might be easy to assume that there was a connection there, but there is no connection. The Lynx Trust are doing their own thing.
With rewilding.
With rewilding of lynx. It's got nothing to do with Rewilding Britain, and David Balharry was very clear about that. And I got the impression from the discussion, and anybody who was there, I'm sure had the same feeling, is that they don't necessarily agree with a lot of what they're doing or how they're going about it, but that was the impression that we got.
He did also say that he would like to actually change the name of Rewilding Britain.
Yeah, I think you do pick that up a little bit later on.
I think it comes in later on.
Yeah, he did, which is a good point. It gets picked up by saying, well, why are you calling it rewilding, when really what he's really, if you melt it down as to what he's getting to, it's possibly like a different view of managing land and how we can possibly maximize its potential. That's really what he's discussing if you boil it down. So yeah, you will hear that as well. So we kick off here with Jamie Stewart, I can't quite
conflict
remember
for
what
the
he
animal.
was
You know,
discussing,
perhaps a
but
wild
he was
animal
quite animated.
predating on a domesticated species. There was conflict, and the animal lost. But that payment was direct to the people, direct to the community, not to ideologically driven areas or organisations. I think that's where we have to be very, very careful. I said status quo. I said we're very good in Scotland at doing things. I mean, David said surely somewhere in Scotland there's a place where we can have wilderness. You could take any amount of people from inner cities and point to the wilderness of Scotland. A wee bit of Hill and Glen's famous world over for it, but in actuality, every bit of it is managed by humans. So we have out-evolved our predators, we have moved on in terms of our understanding of conservation, and we have to be very careful how we manage our land in our short timescale. I seen on television one of our most revered conservationists standing with a backdrop at the Cairngorm National Park, and he raised his arm and said, in my lifetime this has changed. So what? His lifetime, life of a man, 80 years? Try an epoch. We cannot measure in our own lifetime how landscape has changed. Yes, we can contribute to that and that ongoing demise of a landscape, but I think we're far better versed today than ever before. So I think the indulgence of the Scottish Government and their politics needs to be directly down to community-led initiatives as opposed to ideologically driven organisational debates and discussions.
Can I possibly bring Alex into the discussion? And I think particularly playing on the fact you're originally from a Gaelic-speaking community on Skye, Crofter's son, been involved in deer management. How do you see any possibility for communities?
This is Alex Stoddart.
I think up until now there's been precious little talk about the actual people and in the places themselves. What is rewilding? It wasn't until the very end of David's presentation to us that we found out that rewilding is natural processes being restored. Well, Rosanna Cunningham, a couple of days ago, said to us that wild land needs to be actively managed by man, and we stand by that. The best managers of that land right now are keepers, stalkers, farmers, and landowners. If you want to conserve land, fine, we think that's progressive. If you want to protect land, I don't support that. I think that's backward. If you want to enhance land, then invest in the people that are currently doing the best job out there. So rewilding the conversation, we're open to it. My own view is that we should have a symposium, a high-level panel, where we can all have a chat about the principle, the policy, the ideas behind rewilding. What does it actually mean? Is it flora? Is it fauna? What species are we looking at? The high-level principles are important, but in terms of the actual conversation, that should be led by communities potentially affected themselves. Another thing that I take issue with was the start of the presentation in regards to big game hunting. I'm not entirely sure what the relevance of that was. We don't really have big game hunting here in the UK, and where it exists, in my experience as a travelling hunter abroad, is that the best conservation projects in Africa are often led by hunter conservationists. The raison d'etre for many of the species, and certainly East and South Africa, is hunting, and that keeps them in that place. And certainly countries that don't have hunting, you can see the decline in many of the species. Cecil the lion is not representative of big game hunting anywhere in the world. We know that the canned hunting of cats is unacceptable. We don't support that in principle or practice, and I would not hold that as an example in terms of hunting, sustainable hunting anywhere in the world. So our view, certainly at SACS, is that hunter conservationism is the future, that the discussion should be led by communities, that the people best placed to undertake the enhancement of the environment are currently the stalkers, the keepers, the recreational shooters, the fishermen, the landowners, the farmers, the crofters themselves. If you can incentivise those people to stay within the communities and create vibrant, sustainable communities, so much the better for the environment itself. One last thing, respect the dignity was raised. Now, dignity comes from having a viable community and having a job in a viable community. I can't see how rewilding does that. Most of the charities that I've been involved with in the past, they're not sustainable. They're dependent on high-level membership subscription, high-level EU grant funding, and high-level UK subsidy. If you are thinking of a future, an enhancement future for the environment within Scotland that includes communities, you have to create jobs. And I'm yet to see a business case for rewilding based on that. Thank you.
Again, sort of really good points. Can I just clarify the thing about the big five? So sometimes in a presentation, you don't just get
Back
the
to David
clarity of the
Balharry.
message that you're trying to get across. I guess I'll sort of make a few points. First one is that the big five shows that there is change in society. So that's why I talked about it, that it used to be acceptable to go and shoot those things, and now it's not. It's an example of change. What's interesting about it is, though, that safari tours now market as a tourism thing to go and see and take pictures of the big five. So it's just an example of change. That's what it was about. They entirely agree with all the comments, and I hope I've made that clear, that this is about owners working with communities to work out what's best for their future. The other thing is, though, that one thing I haven't mentioned yet is that, you know, people are saying that status quo is fine. If you look at the statistics to do with conservation, which are published sort of every 25 years, they don't make good reading. So 70% of species in the uplands monitored over the last 50 years are in decline. I'm not trying to defend that, I'm just saying that statistic's out there. So in terms of looking at what's happening just now, I don't think society is going to allow those declines to continue. They will look to find ways of addressing it. I agree entirely that you've got to find a way that delivers jobs on the ground. Yourself, you're just making the point that, is there any examples anywhere in the world where this works? I'd be the first to say that, well, there are examples. We're just about to publish and make available to you all examples from around the world of socioeconomic examples of where communities derive their living from this. That's not to say that that's transferable to Scotland. So we will try and present the report in a way that allows people to look at it and say, are there any elements of that that could work here? And if there are, let's have a look at it. But let me be absolutely clear. If this doesn't work for landowners and rural communities, I'm with the panel. It won't happen. My point is that I think it can work. And I'd say if it can work, in the absence of the keystone, to just sort of put aside the keystone predator argument, if it can work in the absence of that, why would you not do it? Because if you look at the reasons why you own land, security of land ownership, my argument would be that this will increase security. If you look at power and control, it's going to increase power and control. If you go and try and dine out in London at the moment with celebrities on the red carpet, really it's not, you know, the number of people that you can speak to about sports shooting is going down. If you speak about you're involved in some sort of conservation movement in whatever country in the world, celebrities like that. So again, it's changing. So status is another measure. In terms of investment and profit, two economic models, then I'd say, well, rewilding competes favourably. And the final one, which is important to most people in the room and to myself, is hunting. Hunting still exists within a rewilding model. So as you don't have keystone species, somebody's going to have to control your ungulates. Even if you had keystone species, even if you had them, then you still have opportunities for hunting. So I kind of, what I'm sort of pleading with you is to say, don't close the door on it. It's like there are lots of interesting discussions to be had, but also don't be diverted by keystone species arguments of lynx or wolves coming back. And I'm very strongly supportive of a community-led approach.
I think that reinforces what I just previously said earlier. There were the two aspects there, focusing on Africa, where David discusses the fact that it is now not necessarily particularly tasteful to discuss big game hunting. That doesn't mean that view is right. In fact, we talk about it a lot on this show, and I think the stance that we should be taking is we need to educate to make people understand that big game hunting is actually a vital part of the sustainability of those species, whereas he kind of sweeps past that there, talking about photographic safaris on top of that. Well, that's actually nothing new. That's been done for a very long time, and in fact, a lot of the companies that have recently opened up photographic safaris where there used to be hunting concessions is only because they've been closed down. Botswana is a good example. Kenya is the example from back in the 1970s, and certainly Kenya has failed miserably, and Botswana looks like it's going the same way with hunting being closed down. So I think that was a fairly poor example to bring into a debate on rewilding, because it fails on pretty much every account.
And the celebrity thing. honestly, who actually cares what they have to say? I mean, we're talking celebrities in general here. Do I care that Joey Essex doesn't like
Who's Joey
us,
Essex?
exactly us talking about hunting?
No.
Who cares?
Well, I suppose the problem is that a large section of society actually put weight in what celebrities say, even if they have no knowledge of the subject, and
that's the problem.
But should
but I don't think conservation
no.
efforts should be hindered. The fact that someone that has never probably stepped in that country has only seen a news report, and because they have a little bit of weight behind them, should we actually listen to them? I mean, Ricky Gervais, prime example.
Worrying about your status within those circles because of what you think, even if you are right. Again, I don't really see where that fits into anything. If you strongly believe something, irrespective of how that fits within those social circles, that should actually be irrelevant if it's for the greater good of conservation, management, and wildlife. And just lastly, before we pick up again, I think that there was a distinction drawn there between conservationists and hunters, whereas we're always big proponents to say that hunters are some of the greatest conservationists, and if you are a hunter, whether you realize it or not, assuming that you are an ethical hunter, which most people are, you're actually a conservationist, whether you thought.
Thank you, David. In my mind, one of the issues you mentioned about species decline in uplands, and I'd be interested to hear exactly which species you're referring to. But again, from the studies that Game Conservancy have produced and others, it seems to be very clear that a lot of the upland species, your likes of your golden plover and your curlew, are far better off under the protection of managed shooting ground. And in the UK, the amount of hours put into conservation work, I mean, shooting controls more acres of ground than any conservation group put together. It's equivalent of 16,000 full-time equivalents working in conservation. Do you agree that shooting is a vital part of that mix?
So I've been really fortunate in the sense of a chance to travel to different parts of the world where there's been less interference, whether it's in the high Arctic or whether it's in the Amazon.
Balharry.
And there those ecosystems exist. It's not abandoned land. It's the way the land has always been. There are indigenous peoples hunting off that land, and they always have done. And we value those lands as some of the most biodiverse and rich places on the planet. So that's at one end of the spectrum. The problem is when you bring all that back into Scotland, then yes, you can manage hare. If you graze grassland heavily, you will get a greater diversity of your flowers. That's just what happens. So the harder you manage land, the more diversity that you can create. And that's a challenge for the whole way that conservation works in this country. And that's the choice. That's why it's the paradigm shift. Are you going to say that, look, it's maximizing the number of things and managing, and you could do better? So if it's curlews or whatever, I'm saying that from a conservation perspective, if you are hell-bent on managing for diversity of species, of course you could manage it and get more. On the other hand, if you let it go and you let natural succession go through, it will go through stages of being very biodiverse, and then it will go to monocultures. And then if you have perturbation, whether it's through fire or disturbance through wild boar or whatever, that's how ecosystems work. And the argument is, it just gets back to a really simple point, is do we have any space in Scotland where that wants to happen? And I guess I'd sort of go back to the very start and say is that, this post is landowner-led. There are landowners out there who own significant areas of land in Scotland who actually see this as something that they're really interested in. And the point that we're making is, well, if they combine with the rural communities and jointly they see a very positive future for themselves, then that's a good thing.
Could I possibly bring in...
Yes. It was really about your point, David, that we've been talking about this. You said 30 years ago we had...
This is George Milne, Scottish Regional Development Officer for the National Sheep Association. You will hear him in a second when he actually picks up the microphone that he's being handed here.
That 30 years ago we had a very good countryside. And the reason for that is because generations before us had farmed it in a natural way. They knew how many sheep they could run on the hill. Gamekeepers knew how to control the place. And we planted trees where we wanted to plant trees. Another point that was brought up. Now, the last 30 years, we've had various subsidies and schemes that have altered the way that was carried out in the previous generations. So we've had schemes that encouraged higher sheep production. We got overgrazing. We've had to go back from that. We've had schemes to try and protect birds, certain types. We've had schemes to protect wildflowers. And we've all been paid for them. And in a lot of cases, they've actually not delivered what they were aimed to deliver. So I would suggest a lot of the grants and schemes that have come out over and above a basic payment to maintain farming the way it should be in the hills and uplands has actually reduced these species. So if we all admit that, then we need to sit down and work out what we're going to do forward. And someone mentioned the word, Stuart, I think it was. Now I'm too far from my notes. The nature, some comment you said, where's that top page? No. Sorry about that. It was a really good statement. Give nature a chance to build. And I think we would all support that. And it's about getting a balance. And maybe what we had 30 years ago was the correct balance. But giving nature a chance to build does not mean going abroad and catching species that we don't have, bringing them here and trying to reintroduce them, as happened with seagulls, to the detriment of the sheep industry, the golden eagle, and all other sort of birds and things. You know, the more you try, sometimes the less you deliver. I think that probably sums up where I'm at. Oh, one last thing. And I'm going to mention this because I have to. And it's about the welfare of the sheep industry. And, you know, we try our hardest to keep sheep alive, and we try our hardest to make sure they're raised to high welfare standards. We're all inspected on an annual basis. And yet we have to live with things like seagulls, ravens. Okay, we have a license that we can vaguely control ravens. It's slightly difficult to get. But we can't go out and shoot a raven when it's busy eating a live sheep that happens to have got caught on its back. And to me, that is serious welfare issues on the sheep industry. So any other rewilding that comes in that involves animals like lynx and wolves, no one gives a damn about the welfare of sheep. As long as we can have people in the countryside that want to come and see these animals, they don't have to live with them. They just want them so they can come and try and see them. It's farmers and land keepers and estate owners and gamekeepers that have to live with the consequences. So maybe the one thing we've come out of today, I would say, is rewilding to me is not a good way forward. We maybe should be looking at nature, a chance to build it. That would be a better topic.
I was just about
Very
to bring you into it, Stuart.
And that is why his vocal
bearing in mind the
peaking
audience
was all over the
today, I mean,
place.
one of the things about today is the fact that most people in the room represent landowning interests. How do you address that? I mean, are there ways you can get the two to coexist?
I think there's a lot of common ground, to be honest. I couldn't agree with you more. And I'd go back
This
to
is
my
Stuart
my first
Brooks
statement,
from the
really,
John
that
Muir
I think
Trust,
a lot of the
CEO.
tension around rewilding is within the conservation movement, rather than necessarily in other sectors of land management. So one thing that I don't think is coming across, and David has mentioned it at least 4 times, I think, is that this isn't about taking an ideology and forcing it onto anybody across large parts of Scotland. This is about beginning a debate to say, are there some places where this could happen? And that has to happen with public support. And there's a discussion, I'm sure, that is going to happen in terms of those land management payments about how much the public are prepared to support this financially. But a community would need to embrace it and need to see the opportunity and the benefit. I don't think anybody's arguing against that. So I do feel that we're kind of setting off on a kind of a binary discussion here, that one approach is better than the other. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think there are places that are likely to be more appropriate to take this approach than others. And there are places that are likely, I think, to be best used in other ways, such as sheep farming.
Just to reiterate, we're back to Project Zoo. So if there are other places in Scotland where this can
Stewart
happen,
again.
absolutely. Scotland, as I said earlier, has got some wonderful open landscapes and habitat that could support a various biodiversity of predators and prey. But is it somewhere where we see a fragmented nature of management, something that's isolated, perhaps managed to the detriment of its neighbours? We've seen most recently the John Muir Trust having quite a proactive culling programme of deer, which was detrimental to their neighbours. So was that community engagement? Was that public spirited? Was that ideologically managed landscape? So I think ultimately David should take back a message that it needs to change the name of the project from Rewilding to Game and Wildlife Management.
Yeah, I spent the first 6 weeks in my job trying to change the name, and I can assure you it was the
David Balharry talking again.
And I didn't succeed. And I guess what I've got to is that if we can carve out a brand in Scotland that tries to sort of say, well, look, forget about the name, but just whatever this brand is, just be aware it's about taking forward a conversation within the parameters I've been speaking about today. Yeah, I mean, I could go on. There's so much to speak about. I think we just only touched the surface on all the debates. You were up speaking a second ago, and you were sort of saying, well, maybe go back 30 years. I don't think it's about going back 30 years. It's just about saying, well, let's learn from the past, and there were bad points in history, and there are some good things in history. Let's use all that information to work out how we go forward. The policies of the past are horrendous. I mean, whether it's scheduled tax relief or heritage payments on sheep, it's just littered. History is littered with huge examples of just horrendous policies. But if you look at all the trajectories going forward, I kind of think I haven't heard anything today that's different to what do we want. We want people employed in rural areas. We want stable and secure economies. And if there's an opportunity to do that around wildlife tourism and different types of whether it's renewable energies, these are all good things, and I don't think people should feel challenged by it. And the interesting thing is that in terms of, Rory, you set this up, and all through this conversation there are like, what do you call it? There's powder keg moments where you could challenge things. And for me, it's like, I'm hoping speaking to an audience that kind of is aware of what living in a rural environment is about. And, you know, you're saying about wolves, and that's a powder keg moment in terms of wolves kill people. Yeah, bears kill people. Lots of things kill people. 17 people in North America died last year because furniture fell on them. It's like, you know, get a grip on the risk of these things. I'm not interested in wolves coming. I genuinely don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime. My point is like, let's debate with brutal honesty, the point that Andrew's making, what the issues are. Let's not be shy to talk about what the issues are. Let's not try and pander to the public and try and get sort of clamoured support, but let's actually explore the debate. If it doesn't work, I'll be the first to say, why would you want to do it?
Thank you. I wasn't on this idea about honesty and whether we can get it to work. I think that's, again, we're
Andrew
polarising
Gilruth,
it into a binary
GWCT.
thing about will it work, won't it work. There are people here today that have spent the last 20, 30, 60 years actually getting it to work. The introduction of conservation headlands, the people that have reintroduced grey partridges, we've got black grouse recovery projects. There are all sorts of organisations which have done other things as well and have made huge strides. And to try to paint this as something entirely different and new, I think is wrong. This is a spectrum of conservation, and there's a tendency to focus on the one end, which is the glamorous end about lynx and wolves and things, which is getting some media attention, when actually we need to start at the other end, which is all about the insects on the ground, and actually the beginning of the food chain. And when you've got all of that right, then you can start talking about possibly reintroducing the more major or apex predators. There's also a failure really to discuss the management of the meso predators, the middle predators, because if they are generalist predators in the middle, they have a huge advantage and it can operate at the balance is at the detriment of the prey species. And if you were just to take the fox alone, it's estimated that in order to maintain the UK fox population at its current level, you have to remove about 240,000 foxes a year. Now, the cars help with that because the first 100,000 are removed by cars. But actually, the next, if you like, chunk has, the percentage that will naturally die, and then there's a percentage which actually have to be removed. But there's no one being honest about this, about the level of work which has to be done in the absence of these apex predators to be able to control the populations. And I think there are a lot of people that would feel more comfortable if there was a more honest recognition of the work that the gamekeepers are doing about trying to maintain the balance in the absence of the apex predators until they return.
I'm just conscious of time, so we're probably going to have to wrap it up reasonably soon. But I thought, looking at the makeup of the board, and there's obviously a strong field sports leaning. Can rewilding projects, as they exist at present, the likes of what John Muir Trust is doing, and if it was extended to wider basis across Scotland, it seems to be very sort of polarised between the rewilding and almost a slight animal rights leading to it, and to actually the idea of public amenity of hunting ground that they have across the rest of Europe and North America. I'll ask a few of you in turn whether you see the two coexisting in the one model.
My view in this one is well documented. I see a balance between the American-European model of hunting
Alex
and
SACS.
what we have here. If you are going to hunt by permit with greater access for local people to hunt on the hill with shotgun or rifle or fishing rod, then my view is you need to have gamekeepers on the ground or wardens on the ground to actually make sure that that's done sustainably. Much of the hunting I've seen by permit around the world has not been sustainable. It's been driven by trophy, driven by opportunity, and that's something that is not correct management of these species. So if we can bring the best of what we currently have and make it accessible to more people, and make field sports more socially acceptable for generations that are further and further removed from the countryside, never mind hunting and fishing and shooting. We have people out there that don't actually understand anything about farming and where the food comes from. We meet them every week. But if you can make that more socially acceptable and make hunting, shooting, fishing more accessible to the many, I think that we can protect the uplands, protect the lowlands, protect our biodiversity a great deal more. And it goes back to whether it's conservation, is it preservation, or is it enhancement? My view is enhancement. We have to go forward. And that going forward is together. So, I'm thankful to have the conversation here with David, and it's good to have Stuart here too. We support many of the things that they are talking about in principle. It's heading in the right direction. I just think that we tend to get a little bit lost in some of the politicised arguments, some of the single species focus, and it's time to actually broaden that discussion and talk about the practices, the principles at a higher level. And I think we can actually take this forward. But we need people back in the glens. I come from Skye, and the community that I currently come from is populated by holiday makers. At winter time, the houses are empty. There's only 3 or 4 houses that still have people in them out of about 124. So that's sad. In order to repopulate the highlands in a sensible way and sustainable way, you have to create jobs and opportunities for work and good living. I can't see how rewilding will do that. If you're going to have rewilding as a way of choosing a select number of areas, letter U or Noidert, whatever, and saying, right, we'll just leave it be and see what happens after that, I think that's wrong. We have to look at new ways of primary employment, be it gamekeeping, be it agriculture production, be it fishing. And as we go forward, we all know that food sustainability in Scotland and Europe is going to be a major issue for many of us. We haven't got the issues here of water yet, but food is going to be a major issue. And I'm not long out of a conversation with a professor from Oxford University in population dynamics, whose response in terms of the future and how we're going to cope with lack of food and population increases, I quite honestly, Alex, I don't know. I think we're in trouble. So the conversation that we have in the future isn't so much about everything else apart from humans. It's about humans as apex predators doing the very best for our environment, but also making sure that we can sustain ourselves.
Well said, Alex. I think I would argue very strongly that rewilding, as I said earlier, is a misnomer. It's the wrong title for the project. We are managing most of the objectives with the obvious absence of some of the apex predators. We, as individuals, as collectives, we manage the greatest tract of our wee bit hill and glen to the best of our abilities. We are hampered mostly by restrictions on protection to other species. There are some species that are sacrosanct. It was mentioned earlier about the impact that ravens have in the agricultural industry. And having had worked for SNH, I worked in the office that issued licenses, and it would be almost a straw poll. How many will allow you to kill, as opposed to will we let you address the problem? So we need to work hard, and most of us on the panel and in the room are working towards a generalised engagement with a new government to try and make that happen. We have never been in such a volatile position in the EU, but let alone Scotland. Scotland, in terms of our land reform and land reform commitments from the Scottish Government, can only be detrimental to the long-term gain of rewilding. If you allow the removal of the status quo and to allow it to change into the fragmented nature of the Scottish Government's aims and objectives, we'll see a great deterioration in our wildlife and our wild places. So I would urge David to go back and try very hard to get him to change the title and to work more closely. It seems he is working close with landowners, but work more closely with landowners and gamekeepers to understand the great depth and breadth of knowledge that's out there. I used to describe myself as a dangerous man. I was a gamekeeper with a degree. I could tell you what I did, and I can explain in scientific terms what it meant. David's got a PhD, he's some way ahead of me, so he's got the ability to converse with politicians to help them understand what we do in a more productive format.
Clearly, I'm going to say that I think there is lots of opportunity. I think there's, I don't see these two concepts of rewilding and land management in the traditional sense as being diametrically opposed at all. I think there's opportunities to focus in certain areas, and I think that's probably one thing that Scotland hasn't done adequately. It's not taken a spatial approach to planning, in the sense that there are certain opportunities that I think are better focused, and our resources are going to be limited. Certainly if we're looking at applying public funding to supporting different land management activities, I think those land management activities need to be prioritised in certain areas above others. Now that's a real challenge, because who owns the land currently and who manages the land currently might not necessarily kind of have the same objectives. So that is a real, that's just a genuine practical difficulty. And I suppose we're all involved in planning on an individual property basis, but also on a collective and sometimes a landscape basis. And some of these discussions, I think, have to happen there. I mentioned earlier on that there is a debate about to happen around the development of a new vision for the uplands of Scotland. And I think this is the opportunity for us to integrate this discussion across all of the land uses in the uplands. And I would hope, and I think this has been a respectful and considered discussion, and I kind of hope that can continue within the development of that vision. Because if there's possibly something that's been slightly missing around this discussion, is what are we aiming for? What is that vision? I think it's been clear that we all think that it's important that people are an integral part of that discussion, and the economy of the rural economy and community livelihoods are part of that discussion. But I also think there needs to be an articulation of the vision for the land, and I'd welcome that.
Thank you. I'll just go back to my opening comments about this is all fine, and we're all trying to achieve the same thing, but we have to agree that we have to properly investigate.
That wasn't Andrew Gilruth. This is
We've
Andrew
got to
Gilruth.
agree that we actually need to manage, and we have to have much more honesty about the impacts. It is not possible to introduce change where everybody and everything is a winner. And if we carry on not investigating and just releasing things in the hope that we can make things better, and it will probably be a good thing, if we deny that we actually need to manage things and we're not honest about it, we will end up with the same reaction we have with the EU referendum. We'll end up with the wrong solution.
Thank you. Well, my kind of view on this is that basically I believe land in Scotland is scarce. It's
Back to
under
George
threat
Milne.
from a lot of things, but particularly I can name a few tree planting targets. They require a huge area of land to meet Scottish Government tree planting targets. And if my figures are right, I think we're about 13,000 hectares behind on that at the moment. We have food and drink targets that require food production. And we have energy targets that require turbines. When you start putting turbines up, they take up a big chunk of the hills and the uplands. We have climate change targets, which are definitely going to have an impact on farming in the countryside going forward. We have housing targets, so we need more land taken up by housing. Everyone needs more land, or every sector needs more land in Scotland, so our land is under pressure from all sectors. And again, it's back to what I said earlier. We need a balance, and we need to keep that balance going forward. In my view, we have a fantastic countryside. It's the envy of about every other country in the world. That's why so many people come to Scotland to see our hills, our uplands, and the way we maintain it. So finally, it's just about balance, and we need to live, and we need to work, and we need to maintain it and keep it.
Okay, so I just like to make two things. One, a comment on skill sets, and the other one, a comment on rights. So on skill sets, one of the things is that if you look at Highland Stalker and you say, what's his key skill set? And people think, well, it's the ability to take a guest in to shoot a stag or whatever. And I have to say, well, it's been a big part of my life, and that's not the way that I'd characterise their skill sets at all. I think with the true skill set of a Highland Stalker is somebody that can take a guest out in the hill, in the midges, in the rain for 8 hours and entertain them. And the shooting of the stag at the end of that is a very small part. That skill set is still required. It will always be required in Scotland. And that's the most marketable skill set that we've got. So that's on the skill set. In terms of, I think what this debate boils down to is that there are representative bodies, there's interest groups, there's politicians, there's people like me, and we're all individuals. But the bottom line is that land is owned by people, and those people have rights. And they're funding this work just now. And a key part of that is that, look, and it's agreeing with everything the panel said, is that there is something here to explore, whatever you call it. The name might not be right, but it doesn't change the concept. So let's explore it. Let's look at its implications and its practical applications. And then once we've done all that, and once we're sort of saying, well, let's then expose that to really critical thinking. And if we come out the other end and say, you know what, that might be worth just putting our toe in the water and just taking it gently, I'd say, well, why not? It's an option.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very conscious of time, so I think we will have to wrap it up there. But I think you'll all agree it's been a very vigorous discussion, and hopefully I think it's been balanced as well. And we've heard from both sides, and I think there are areas of overlap. And I think it's a journey that will probably be going on, probably once everyone in this room has long passed on. But I think it's a sign of the way things are going. There's the example of the Milne Forum, where various members of the room engage in, whether they're part of NGOs or whether they are lobby groups.
Well, I would say that's probably one of the most varied debates we've brought you. It certainly had the most people in it.
Yep.
And the most variety of ideas, concepts, and a subject in itself, which we will most definitely be revisiting, and something which we see in the newspapers every fortnight pretty much. It is a hot topic right now.
And once again, apologies for slightly disjointed, nothing to do with us whatsoever, because if it was in control of us, we would have actually made sure that everything was working beforehand.
The fuel was
in the generator, which is quite critical. And apologies for the bad audio for one of the guests. Once again, nothing to do with us. We couldn't actually control that. He was just speaking so loud that it was cutting out all the microphones.
Yeah, through the PA system. Yeah. So we've done our best, but a couple of bits of that are maybe a little bit uncomfortable if you've got headphones in. So apologies for that. It's not our usual standard of high quality audio, but it was unavoidable in this particular situation. We have another competition for you.
We do.
And this week, I can't show you if you're watching on YouTube because we don't have it here, but I can tell you what it is. It is a Caldwell front shooting rest. So if you are into shooting, which a lot of our listeners are, then it's a great addition to your range kit bag. And we will put some pictures up as soon as it arrives. In fact, I think it's due to arrive today. So as soon as we get that, we'll stick
But don't
some
worry, it'll
pictures
be
on our
here in
Facebook page.
time for the next podcast. So.
It will. So if you want to win a Caldwell front shooting rest, all you have to do is enter the competition. And we haven't actually thought how are you going to enter, but by look on Daryl's face, he's worked out how you need to enter.
There has been a very popular one. I think we'll do it again. We're going to do tag a person in the post that we put up.
Okay, yeah. So this is going to be a Facebook one.
Yep.
So hopefully most of you are on Facebook. If you're not, find somebody who is. The pinned post will be this podcast. Tag somebody in it. Tag a friend.
Tag one friend in it, and then you'll be in a chance to win.
Yeah, and you can win a shooting rest from Caldwell.
Well, I think that is it for today. We've covered a huge amount, and join us in 2 weeks' time. I know that Josh James, who was a very, very popular guest of ours, is going to come on in a few weeks. I'm not entirely sure. He's a very busy man. He's got a Discovery show. He's got his YouTube channel. He has a huge amount on, but we're going to be discussing specifically 1080 poison, which is going on right now in New Zealand. They're currently systematically wiping out their population of everything. It is actually for targeting species, small predators, but it has no target. It just targets everything. Josh was covering it the other day. He was taking some video of the 8 helicopters that were literally dumping tons and tons of 1080 poison into the forest.
Probably the biggest wildlife travesty happening in our lifetime. Right. It may seem strange to say this, but that is right up there with the rhino poaching and the ivory poaching going on in Africa. And you know what? It's even state-sponsored. It's quite disgusting. We're going to get Josh James on to talk about that because he is a man in the know, and our listeners like him. We're also going to have Sean Conway on, the man who just completed a triathlon of Great Britain.
Hang on, not only that, the world's longest triathlon. He's also the only man to swim the entire length of Great Britain. He has also cycled round the entire planet.
So he is just a seriously hardcore, cool dude who we met maybe 2 months ago now. It was a while ago, not very far from our office here where we record this. We asked him at the time if he'd come on the podcast. We pinged him a message the other day, and he said he would. So hopefully next week we will be recording with him.
Yep.
And we can't tell you anymore, guys. That's far too much for one podcast.
Can't tell you anymore. We have some exciting projects coming up in the future. Me and Byron are heading off to Norway very soon to be filming a few different projects. We're going to give you some more information on that in the coming weeks.
We will. If you haven't seen our episode 4 of Into the Wilderness, it is out on YouTube.
And there's a lot of films coming out right now with all the Merlin groups from our company, Pace Productions UK. So check out all those films.
And we also have to give a shout out to Field Sports Channel.
Oh, of course,
who have just produced probably one of the best films, certainly for grouse shooting, maybe shooting full stop, ever made. It's been made in a brilliant way, a very documentary style. If anybody saw, I think it was called Wild Scotland. It was the BBC documentary that was made with the narration was Ewan McGregor. If anyone saw that, it is basically a shooting version of that, and anybody could watch it and appreciate it, whether you know anything about hunting or you care about it or not. It is just brilliant. And David Wright, who filmed and put that together for Field Sports Channel, did a superb job. I was on the phone to him this morning. I do have to put a little plug in for ourselves, and particularly my brother.
I'm not saying it's that amazing just because
I'm
filmed.
I'm going to say it for you. I'm going to say
thanks,
it for you.
Thanks.
So our company, Pace Productions UK, provided and Daryl did all the filming because I wasn't there. The first couple of minutes of the actual film that
a whole
made.
part of a season.
Yes, the whole part of a season, which was all the heather burning at the start and the interviews. We actually filmed, but we didn't edit. David did that.
Eden was my he was my help for the day. Eden Anand.
Yeah, who's in New Zealand.
Well, I think he's in Fiji now. He was my help for the day. So thank you, Eden, for helping me for not really doing that much, but he did. He was there.
He was there. Apparently, he was in it as well. Though I never spotted him.
He was beating.
Oh, was he?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, that's
Join us in 2 weeks. Download us, iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, SoundCloud. Tell your friends about the show. Keep leaving us reviews. Someone actually just left us a new review yesterday. Thank you very much. I'll give you a shout out in 2 weeks' time when I've actually got it up on my phone.
This podcast is supported and brought to you by the Scottish Association for Country Sports. Without the support, we wouldn't be able to bring you this. So a big thank you to them. Go check them out if you don't know exactly what they're about. In fact, listen back to this podcast because the director of SACS, Alex Stoddart, he was one of the panelists. So that will give you a flavour of the kind of people who run that organisation.